It's see a need, feel a need. And when you are driven by purpose, when you're driven by passion, when you're driven by conviction, meaning there's a greater calling purpose of who you are and what you're supposed to do, and when you understand the value of team, that just means we collectively share in our knowledge so that we make sure that our newest person on the team is as strong as our most successful person on the team.
All right, guys. This is Advisors Collective, episode 2. I'm here with Scott Leonard, Jeremiah Diamond. It's two of my partners. This is going to be the most casual financial podcast that's ever been created, and maybe the most educational in some regards. I think people are going to get a lot from it. The whole premise of the show, when I started thinking about this, was financial advisors are usually obsessed with like getting better. We're always reading books and listening to podcasts and YouTube channels and reading financial journals and all that goes with trying to be able to more deeply serve clients and do a better job in our business, right? And I'm like, who makes anything that you might want to? It's Thursday night. It's not the weekend, but it's Thursday night. And you're like, I want to work on my business, but I also need to relax a little bit here. And you might almost a show, you pull up on YouTube at the house, you pour a whiskey. I'm not goofing off. I'm not watching a game tonight. I'm working on getting better. But a podcast where like I could watch, hang, learn, but also kind of have a drink. You know what I'm saying? It's not always so buttoned up, which I would say is kind of like who we are a little bit. And so that was part of the inspiration from the show for me, was finding this chill way to do a show, but still the content is really, really good, right? So anyways, I'm really excited to do this and to introduce, of course, everybody, who listens to you guys, and just to start the conversation about who we are and all that. So welcome to the show. I talked to you, Scott, when we first met, which we'll get into that. But I told you early on, it's like one of the first things I want to do is a really serious podcast for financial advisors, right? And so why don't we just kind of back up? We'll go into the stories. I think it's fun to kind of talk about history, right? Talk about how did we get here? So how did we meet? Who met who first? You two met each other before me. So I think that'd be really fun. Did you meet Jeremiah first, Scott? Or did you meet Scott through, because you were an independent financial advisor?
Yeah, Scott was my wholesaler's boss. And so he rolled up. My wholesaler was in town in East Texas. And I think Chris said, hey, we're coming over to the house, or we're in town. I said, great, come over to the house. Did we smoke cigars on the back patio? I think we did. I was in coveralls, I think. I wasn't dressed for work. Like I wasn't working that day. And I think he was in a suit, and it's East Texas. It's like 90 something degrees, early spring. And we just sat on the back patio, and I was in my yard clothes, and I want to say I was having a cigar. I don't know if Chris did. Chris learned the first time he came down there to not come into my office in a suit because it's East Texas, So that's the first time I met Scott informally. And then we worked on a case together, I think like 2 months, 3 months after that, I believe.
Scott, is this how you remember this? Do you remember rolling up and he's in overalls? Like what occurred there?
Yeah. So that particular day I had come to Texas. Now I used to cover this area of the country. So the first thing we did was I took Chris to get a proper attire in East Texas, which is a cowboy hat. So I took him that morning up to Longview to Mike's Mad Hatter and got him a proper cowboy hat. And I said, you need to call Jeremiah. Let's go see Jeremiah. And he said, well, come to the house. And then he, of course, gave us some crap for being all dressed up and suited up.
You're too clean.
He probably was smoking a cigar. We did not have a cigar, but it was like middle of the day.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to get into that tonight. We are going to have cigars. We're going to drink whiskey because it's kind of our MO, right? So we're going to get to that. But let's cover everything. I was an independent financial advisor in a captive company, but independent contracted. You were
Same.
as well, right?
Yep. Same.
And then so
Wholesale.
and then you were wholesalers, so you're on the corporate side, right? But then working with the field clearly as you were meeting him.
Yeah, 17 years on the wholesale side of the business.
Who did you work for? How long? Kind of what did that look like?
Started with Hartford. Hartford Life was the number one sold life insurance annuity provider back in the early to mid 2000s, and transferred to Protective Life, covering large national firm at that time, and then spent 15 years with Lincoln Financial, first as a wholesaler, then secondarily in executive management.
Nice. So
Yep.
then you were with Lincoln when you guys met?
Yep.
Okay.
Part of my experience was literally calling on every channel. So the wirehouse channel, the bank channels where I started, independent planner channel, you call it regional, national firms, and I met Jeremiah as a top producing advisor within the channel that I covered at the time. Yep.
Gotcha. Well, we're in North Carolina today, which is your home state.
Yeah.
We are currently at your buddy's house,
Yep.
which, by the way, if you're watching, you're like, where are they at right now? We're at a friend's house who is turned to tell them like what we're in right now.
So this room we're in, you can't see all of it, but it was a formal dining room.
Okay.
Like most homes today, only get used like twice a year, like Thanksgiving and Christmas. And the more we hung out, the more we sampled bourbon and the more we smoked cigars in the freezing cold. He's like, you know what? I think we need to turn this room into a formal cigar room. And so he literally custom built this room himself, custom built the wine racks, the cabinets, designed it, put the walls in, the windows, the doors. It's
beautiful.
Yeah.
So he took a formal dining room, built walls around it to turn it into a closed room.
Yes.
Ventilation, which they can't hear, but there's full on cigar ventilation.
Got his wife's approval, more importantly.
Most importantly.
Yeah,
I got that
that's
approval. Yeah. So we're in North Carolina, right down the street. Your house is literally down the road, right?
Across the road.
So
Yeah.
we're in High Point,
North Carolina.
High Point, North Carolina.
Yeah.
You're from East Texas, Athens,
Yep.
Texas, and then I'm from Northwest Indiana, Crown Point, Indiana. So we're literally like all over the country.
Yeah.
And so it's not rare that we get together, but it's not every day. We spend a lot of time on Zoom as a post-COVID 21st century company. But before we keep diving into all that, first off, I was coming down from Indiana, and Scott, we were on the phone the other day, and we were talking about Buffalo Trace. We love Buffalo Trace. And I was like, you said something about Traveler, the new whiskey by Trace with Chris Stapleton, right?
Yep.
And you're like, y'all don't got it down here yet?
No. I think it gets released either into this week, next week will be the first release in the state of North Carolina.
So, which means it'll be impossible to find in that for a while, probably.
Correct.
So I brought us a bottle down. So we're going to sample that today. So
Beautiful.
from Indiana, and then of course brought cigars. So we're going to, I think we should probably start a pour. Jeremiah, if you want to start your cigar first, why don't you start your cigar?
I'm just hoping that's not like Matthew McConaughey's bourbon. That is horrible.
Hopefully,
by the way.
Buffalo Trace made sure that it doesn't suck, right? Hopefully
Well,
that it's good.
Interestingly enough, last week I was actually with a Buffalo Trace employee, 14-year veteran, who actually it was an actual dinner, and they were going through various samples. But what was cool is he told us that Chris Stapleton and his team actually went through. They had 50 different samples that they went through. And you'll see on the bottle, I think it says number 40. Yep.
That's not bad.
Blend number 40. Cheers. Blend number 40, which, personally sampled, tasted, and selected by Mr. Stapleton himself. And here we go.
It's a little hot right at the first, but smooth after that.
Yeah, we just opened it. Need to give it a few minutes too
To breathe.
But
So breathe in through your nose,
at first, just
open that mouth.
like just getting it first try, really solid. It does have really strong Buffalo Trace notes to it. Like first sip, I'd be like, that's
good.
Buffalo Trace. Yeah, it's really solid so far. I'm interested to see once it opens up a little bit what happens here. So we'll start smoking cigars. We're going to relax. We're going to tell some fun stories. So I think, Jeremiah, you were a contractor. You're running business. You and Scott clearly are doing business. You guys met, but then you must have done some deals together, Scott. Like, how did you solidify, or how did that relationship really come into, like, it was really a working relationship,
Yeah. I mean, just like any business, you always want to make sure you take care of your top producers, right? The ones who produce the most typically get the most attention. And Jeremiah was certainly a top producer, but he also was someone who was really kind of working in a way that wasn't common in terms of the size of clientele he was working with, the way he was approaching the business from a relationship perspective. And so we worked on a really large case together early on in our relationship that was very successful. And that experience of the work that went into really not only work with the client, but see that case through was the foundation of our relationship that we then continued, from that point going forward.
By unique, like, what do you mean by the type of client? Like, what was he doing? And then I'll ask Jeremiah about it. But from the wholesaler side, inside, what do you mean by that?
It was interesting. The client was was a client of a wirehouse advisor, and we did a lot of research really on that client's portfolio. But the particular client had 4 children, each of the 4 kids also had the exact same portfolio, and there was really no strategy for the client around income and tax efficiency in the income, looking at risk as it related to volatility based on the age of the client. And so, part of that was all part of the scope of really trying to solve for what this client's needs were that just completely were not being identified in the current, plan that the client had employed. And the more that we communicated, with the client about what their risk tolerance was and where they were and what they were looking for, the more we realized that they just weren't in a very good spot at all. And so very relational based first, then very needs based second. And not that advisors aren't needs based, but here you had a ultra high net worth client who had no attention to what the top 1, 2, or 3 things that were on their mind were being addressed. Pretty accurate.
That's fair.
Yeah.
So who was the client? Like what? Because he's saying relationship. You're an advisor. And we're not going to spend all day on this, but I think it's important. Like, we as advisors, a lot of time we think first practicality, but then you're kind of saying relationship. And most advisors want to move into a higher net worth space. But so what does he mean by that? Like, and was this the deal that I think you broke a record at the firm you were at, right? In the largest singular client?
No, that was the one that caused me to leave.
Oh,
this first one, one of your cohorts named it the Roger Bannister 1.0 case. Roger Bannister 2.0 was the one that, really rubbed you the wrong way.
The relationship just happened just organically, like most relationships do. And it was just showing up and solving for a need of, using that particular product. It was using Eye for Life, which I had spent the time to read the private letter ruling, and then also the patents, and then spending time with people that helped design that particular product. And but it was learning and taking that application, and then how do I translate that into tax efficient income, especially in the non-qualified space. And so that's what opened the door as the attention grabber. But the relationship was just like anything else. I coached his kids, his grandkids, and soccer and baseball, and just
Do you really know him?
yeah, just hanging out.
Yeah.
One of the this was really important. One of the unique things I remember about one of the first face-to-face client meetings that we did is we actually had the representing advisor, on the phone. We were in person, but they were on the phone in their office. And we just had them walk through. I think a lot of advisors will very quickly try to compare and contrast performance. And I've long believed you will live and die on performance of a portfolio. And we just very respectfully said, can you walk us through, what your thoughts are, kind of what your convictions are based on the portfolio. And we were simply talking about tax mitigation, income generation, estate planning, if you will, asset protection, for just real basic areas. And essentially the advisor acknowledged, even though he had the ability to offer the same type of solutions that we were going to be addressing, he said, we feel like we can mitigate the risk on our own. And so even though we fully understand, and we have access to this, we think we can mitigate the risk of the portfolio on our own. And when we identified the risk on a scale of 1 to 10, it was about a 9.
It was
And
a lot
so
yeah.
it was very, it was really unfortunate, like the way things were structured. But whenever they heard that, when they heard the advisor say, we think we can mitigate the risk on our own, they very quickly understood the strategy was just to protect what they had worked so hard to save. And that was really part of the changing of, here's someone who had a relationship with the family, so they know he cares. We've taken the time, effort, and energy to get face to face with them. And now we're simply just identifying what matters most. And even though these strategies are available, we really think we can mitigate the risk on our own.
So you guys do this deal, you do multiple deals like this, you guys kind of become buddies, right?
Yep.
So like in doing this, but then you're captive. You and I were captive at the same firm. So you're a captive rep. You're dealing with a wholesaler who's in management, but you know what I'm saying? But the wholesale side, you're clearly kicking ass, like doing really well at the advisory side, right? You're taking clients from like major firms and like you're doing that. But like what, and it's not even really the company we were at necessarily, but what were you seeing that just felt like it was just totally broken? Because I know you were having these conversations with Scott when I was having this conversation with other outside people before I met y'all. You know what I'm saying? Like that's what I think is going on a lot in the industry is there's people that are probably listening, they're advisors, they're just going to hear some of these things and go, yeah, I feel like that's a challenge where I'm at, or, whatever the case might be. So what were you experiencing, or what were maybe, we'll give Scott time to light his cigar. So go ahead, Jeremiah.
I think the biggest thing was the aspect of free thinking and the disregard for the disregard for the time, effort, and energy it took to land a case of that size. Most people, if the average advisor, you look statistically, Scott could probably speak to this better, but I would think that, the last case that I did probably represented 5 to 6 years of a career body of work of probably most advisors. And the years, I think that's the part that people don't see is that, and when I was laying this out of why this was a suitable recommendation, which it was, is that they didn't see the 2 years it took to get it to the point where they could say yes or no. And so I think a lot of times, advisors feel hamstrung because you have companies, especially if you're captive, that'll say, hey, bring me lots of business. Oh, wait, that one's too big. Well, what is it? Is it
What do you mean it's too big?
That's what they told me. It's too big. The case was too big.
This is too much money.
Too much money. There's this. Yeah. And I'm like, and I just, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I just said, look, this is either going to be written here or I'm going to hang my shingles somewhere else tomorrow. Because I knew there was someone that would take it. And so I think that's the precipice. Everybody has a breaking point. Some are different than others. It could be product offering. It could be the cut that the company's taken and they feel like, it's too egregious. It could be lack of support from a technology standpoint or ease of doing business. Mine got to the point of ease of doing business, and because my goals and visions were so big of what I wanted to do that it was eye-opening to me when my goal and vision of what I wanted my business to look like was bigger, was a bigger vision than where I worked. And so that was the straw that broke the camel's back for me.
One of the things that Jeremiah just said that's really strategically important in relationship building is, we've seen this transition in the industry over the last 10 years, but going from a very transactional based model to a more relational, right? Commission is what I earn when I sell or buy something. A fee is what I pay for a service being provided. And one of the things that I recognized in Jeremiah was he was committed to the long game. He wasn't, at no point in time was there any pressure with the family, with a client. It was always, what can I do to serve you? When I say serve you, that doesn't mean like help you financially. It could be, can I come over and help you with something like literally at your house? Is it literally just spending time together, on a porch? And a lot of, we always talk about the little things, but I recognize that he would take the time, effort, and energy to just do the little things, the constant touches to really develop the relationship. And at no point in time, would hurry this thing to where the client felt uncomfortable. And a lot of advisors will not take a long game approach to building long-term relationships with people whose money they don't manage. And that was a key ingredient to the success in more than one occasion. So,
I mean, that's really hard. Depending on your personality, I think it has somewhat to do with that, but thinking about, because then you're really caring about people at another level. And that's just what most advisors, we're not brought up in the space. Like you grew up in the annuity world. I grew up selling life insurance first. It's not relationship, it's transaction and like get it going. Right. And then you move into fee-based. Just when you start to move towards that side of the world, you start to realize like, oh, slow down, caring. And if you've been on the other side for a long time, I think it's just what happened in the industry a lot, right? The independent broker dealer space, the hybrid people, things started to go fiduciary, like fee relationship. And if you're on that other side, that's got to be a really hard move. Like I'm 38 and I've already been in the business 18 years. Like I can't imagine if you've been doing it 40 years or something, and you're trying to make that swap, that's got to be really tough because it wasn't just that we changed how we got paid. It's how we changed how the whole process worked. Like that's part of the actual mentals of it. It quit being dial for dollars like an old stockbroker, if you will. It became like, their kids and the sports team, so.
I think a lot of it too has to do with where you live. And I come from a really rural area. I grew up in a rural area in Kansas and live in a rural area in Texas. And everywhere I've lived has been rural. And you can't be an asshole and be in business very long. Like it's just, you just can't. And so I think a lot of times demographics has something to do with it. Seeing people for people instead of a transaction, I think helps. I know it helps. And just recognizing too that it's almost it's almost like a mental game. Because no to me is just, it doesn't mean don't talk to him about it again. It's just not right now. It doesn't mean I'm still not going to talk to you. I'm still going to talk to you about all kinds of other stuff. And the opportunity will always present itself at some point down the road. You just don't know when. And the more lines you have like that in the water, if you're going to be in this business, it's a relational business. You might as well have a lot of relationships. And that's, to me, what makes it fun.
So I need to hear, it's been a few sips. We need to give a Chris Stapleton Traveler Whiskey rating. How are we feeling about it? And
how much was it?
This is a great cigar. It's not a crazy hard find or something. The Plasencia Alma Fuerte Solomon roll is really solid. So I don't think you've had this before. How do you like this?
Did Jeremiah, I turn you onto these?
I had these for years, just like you.
Okay. How much was the bottle? That determines like the rating.
It's $40.
$40 retail.
So it's like $10, $7 more than Buffalo Trace regular.
For 40 retail, I'd probably give it solid 6, maybe 7 out of 10. Good drinker.
It's a good drinker, I feel like. Yeah. At the price point, I think at 50, it would be.
They priced it right at 40. Well,
to me, it almost tastes like a single barreled, almost like a pick of Buffalo Trace. But it's good.
Yeah.
It's a little caramel. It's very caramely. Yeah. So your thoughts?
What do you give it?
On a score? I think it fits his price point. I don't know if I do points as well. I think it fits where it's at.
Yeah.
I think the branding is really smart. I mean, Chris Stapleton's kind of the epitome of like what you think of like country type dudes who drink whiskey. So I think the marketing's really smart, and I think it works at $40.
I do too.
Think so?
Yeah, I mean, with this, I feel like compared to other, whiskeys that are associated with someone famous.
Yes.
I feel like this has more intention, more thought maybe put into it.
Yeah.
Like I feel like based on the quality and knowing just Buffalo Trace, they wouldn't want to put out a product from a marketing ploy that couldn't actually back up, the hype.
No, it tastes like a good Trace.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so much of stuff. I remember Slipknot came out with a bourbon a couple years ago. No bueno.
Dude, is it Long Branch?
Long Branch.
It's horrible.
Horrible.
Why is it called Long Branch? It should be called something else. Like he had so many other tags. It could be all right, or like, I would have bought it for all right. But Long Branch, how do you get that back?
I didn't even try it because, I through buddies like you was like, just kind of like crapping on it. I was like, all right, I'm not trying it. So here's what, we can get into the nerdiness of the financial advising, but I think you're captive. You can't basically do what you want to do, like work with the kind of clients you want to work with, so on and so forth, right? Do you tell him the problem? Did you where at what point were y'all like, maybe we should figure out a different way to do this world? You know what I'm saying?
No, I told him, I told him, I said, I'm done. After that last one, I said, I'm done. And I know, a lot of people in the industry. And I asked him where I should go interview.
Got it. Okay. And then what did you say?
That's what I said. Huh.
North Carolina answer, just a little noise.
I knew that he was frustrated, which is always tough. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why advisors, switch from one firm, to the next. And they say that people don't quit jobs, they quit people. And I think that thinking back to where Jeremiah was, he didn't see a future in where he was at because he could not really pursue the clientele that he was forming a relationship with. And so, that was part of the opportunity that he was thinking about and what he was doing. For a long time, being in this business, recognize an opportunity to just, you know, potentially show up differently. You know, being on the wholesale side of the business, you know, and seeing just demographical shift in the country. I mean, we talk about it all the time, but I don't know if most of the country recognizes the fact that there's 80 million ish, you know, 78 to 80 million, you know, baby boomers who are transitioning in and through retirement. And if you think about the fact that we're now in an industry that has roughly 240,000 licensed financial advisors.
And how many of them work inside a shop? Like how many of them are working with clients versus back office at a custodian or something?
Well, the actual licensed industry is way more than that number. That's the expected actual client facing, you know,
real
number of advisors.
Okay.
You know, and to compare and contrast other professional businesses, you got a million doctors, roughly 2 million attorneys. And, you know, the one thing that I was thinking about, because I spent my whole career doing retirement income planning, was how are 80 million Americans going to understand how to actually not run out of money in retirement? How are they going to meet the challenges of longevity, inflation, market volatility, and not having a relationship with someone? It'd be like, I'm gonna live to 100 and not have a medical doctor. Like, I'm never going to go to the doctor and get checked out.
Right.
Like, why would you approach a 30, 40-year career without having someone
you're not
to help
you're not
you?
going to live to 100 then.
Right.
Right. So you're thinking about this kind of stuff.
Yes.
You know, you got to make a change.
I'm thinking about the 16 CPA relationships or 15 CPA relationships and 6 attorney relationships that I'm having to manage. And it's like whack-a-mole, you know, because it's nothing's cohesive. And I was like, how can I make this better from everything I look at, which he approaches it top down, which is awesome. And I approach it from like
Bottom up.
Like, how's the client going to feel when they see this or have this or experience this? Does it make this better? And then it just kind of works itself to the middle.
And
Which
keep in
really
mind, timing has a lot to do with this conversation. This is like right at pre-COVID.
This is 2019
Ish.
fall, something like that.
And it's fair to say that this, I think it's fair to point out that it's not like this happened in a vacuum. I mean, this was it's the 4th or 5th run-in that I had with these types of deals. And I just had to do a reality check of like, is this really what the next 20 years of my life is going to look like? Because I'm one person, how can I affect the change? I can only control what I can control. So
COVID goes down. Do things kind of go on hold? I mean, like the world did, from what like you were thinking?
No, we had no masks, no nothing. East Texas didn't shut down.
Yeah, you were in Texas. Yeah.
I mean, you could always tell the out-of-towners, they'd come to the grocery store with their mask on, and I'd go stand next to them just to jack with them because I knew they weren't from here.
Yeah,
I'll never forget our first trip post-COVID. I don't remember what state we're in. We walk in, and they're
We're
like,
in Charlotte.
We're in Charlotte?
We're at Eddie
Yeah.
V's in downtown Charlotte.
And they're
I
like,
remember this
sir,
yesterday.
where's your mask? And he just says, I'm from Texas.
More importantly,
Like,
he
don't
looked
you
at
know?
he looked at this 5'0" girl, and you're like, ma'am, I'm from East Texas. We don't wear masks.
I was like, I'm not going to eat a steak with a mask on.
But
Yeah.
think back to COVID. I mean, like, we've kind of forgot what it was like during the first part, but we were all sitting at home,
Right.
like with our thoughts. And when you have that much time, and all of a sudden you're switching from a geographical based model, which is advisors typically worked for the most part within a geographic radius of their community. We're now being forced to go virtual, and you're no longer bound by geographical limitations. You now can form relationships, conduct meetings in a way like never before. And so all of a sudden this dialogue around what if occurs, right? If you're a lifer in any industry, you're always thinking about, how could I do this differently? what would I do to do this in a different way that might be better, that might be more productive for my family, for my business, for my clients, for all that's involved. And that collective thought process, born out of frustration, was really thinking about opportunity, asking this question of what if, what would that look like? And thus began like a journey, if you will.
It's funny because you were going through that mentally. I was going through that mentally. I was literally having conversations with a different group of buddies around the same things, essentially, which is, what I call a post-COVID world, and by post-COVID, I just mean the digital application. Like, there was a lot of us, like, I'm an elder millennial. So, like, we were trying to use Zoom, but it was one of those things where you felt like you were force feeding somebody all the time. Like, you try to get people to do Zoom. They didn't really want to do it. And then all of a sudden they were like instantly adopted because like grandparents weren't going to ever talk to or see their grandkids in most areas of the country if they didn't learn how to get on a Zoom or on a FaceTime or, something, right? So they were like forced into this corner of technology. It was pressed upon them. It wasn't a choice anymore. And I think it just, like, that got a lot of people thinking, like you said, you've got a lot of time to think. All of a sudden you start thinking about the firm you're at, what it does, how it does it. I mean, we're learning this by talking to people from all over the independent space, captive space, from all the different firms. Literally every single week we talk to a lot of people. And that same thought was happening at the same time for people like all over the country. But most of them didn't do anything, right? They're still doing what they were doing in 2019. They're still doing it right now in 2024. They really haven't made a change. So you guys kind of band together. We can fast forward a bit. You start looking around, right? So you start to try to figure out what super OSJ, like, what are you going to do?
Yeah. I mean, we went and looked at the top tier firms in the industry. What does independent advisor look like at a LPL, at an advisor group? What's it look like in a super OSJ model? And just began to really kind of, understand the industry at large. What's it look like? How's it function? What can you do? What can't you do? Right? What fees do clients pay? What products are available? What services can you offer? All the things that any legitimate business owner would want to know. And that was really, part of the what if scenario.
So where did that kind of lead? I'm thinking I met you for the first time in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Atlanta 21.
Yeah. We had already been through.
Cause you guys had already been like going through that.
We'd been to LPL. We'd been through advisor group. We were now at a small broker dealer who was now saying, who got the idea, understood our vision of what we were thinking about, essentially offered us, you were there, kind of offered us, a broker dealer, like, okay, right. You got this, you got that. And so the pieces started to come together. And I think that when you think about like the steps, step number one, which we obviously have adopted full force, is philosophical alignment. Does whoever you're going to work with philosophically align with how you think about the business? And that was about the time that we had our introduction and began to really talk about your version of what if compared to our version of what if, and the brainstorm.
Yeah, and there was a lot of similarities. Like, I was in a different space than him. I was doing more volume, marketing, still relational, but just it was like $21 million transaction instead of $120 million transaction is the best way to maybe say it, or something. It was like different world, but the same kind of view. It almost felt
same
like
leash.
Same niche.
We had the same leash. It doesn't matter.
Oh, we had the same leash. Oh, for sure. Not niche, but leash.
The leash is the leash.
We were thinking about client experience, advisor functionality. You were immediately in the headspace of, what's it look like? Like, what's that brand look like? What's that experience from a client perspective look like? What's the technology feel like, from an interaction perspective? And that was like a component that we weren't even at that point in time really talking about, and you were like so far down that path on how you were thinking about just the industry in a completely different way than we were thinking about experience. You were thinking about what's it look like, feel like, and how does it become potentially more attractive to, you know, a larger audience.
Well, I think that's partially why once we kind of banded together, we didn't end up somewhere, because like what you were talking about wasn't really going to fit into somewhere where you had a leash, maybe, for the best way to put that. Right. And then I was obsessed with, like you said, like, what is the actual brand like, client experience, not just from their experience with the advisor, but their experience with the company, like the actual firm that's connected to it. And do they see that, or are people, I've always thought, are people, they might say, I really love my guy, my lady, you know, my advisor. But do they say, but the company that he or she is at is awesome? You know what I'm saying? Like, I never thought that probably occurred in both situations. You know what I mean? Where those two were synonymous. And I just, being in the sales side, being in sales for so long, the other thing I always thought about was most advisors are starving to death because they just don't know who to talk to, especially when they're new. Until you get like really big and you got a big solid book and you're really established. But for a long period of time, right, Jeremiah, like, you're trying to figure it out, you know, you're trying to figure out who to talk to today because you don't have some big batch of referrals or something to go work off of. And I think that model is broken because we don't live in the days of the 1980s, like your sales manager lays down a new Rolodex for you for the month. And they're like, here are your calls, like start cold calling, you know, when that whole side of the game changed, right?
You don't door knock anymore.
You don't door knock anymore. You don't cold call anymore. There's do not, disturb challenges. And, as far as call lines and email, I mean, just all kinds of stuff, and so how do you think differently for the advisor's perspective to be able to get more clients organically? And then how do you then, on the other side, when you actually have somebody, how do you actually provide them whatever the heck they need so you can actually do your damn job? Yeah. Not be like, well, I can kind of do this and let me shove you into what is available, So this is when I think things started to get fun. Like now we're dreaming. We're getting together. I'm getting to know my new buddy from Texas and North Carolina.
Yeah.
I mean, really, like you think back to it, this is pretty wild, right? Like we're working on the side on this theoretical psychotic idea, which is like, why can't we just be rational? I always think about this, right, Jeremiah? Like I've always driven ridiculous cars. Like I have no idea what it's like to have a car that gets more than 20 miles a gallon, right? Because I can't just go buy something that works and is efficient, gets me from A to B. No, it's got to be big horsepower. It's got to always overdo it, right? So what I'm thinking about, and I was like, why didn't we just go, let's just go start an RAA, hang on some platform, build clients. Like what, Scott, maybe your best tip, like we didn't just go do what most people who break away from something, they go do. We instead built a place for others to come to.
Right.
Not just for us to go somewhere. So I think it's actually really key to what the vision was we were like, we're hurting. We see others hurting for a space, not just for their clients, but for themselves, like their own families. Like they don't have a way to ever build anything that they have ownership in, they can feel a part of, they can grow with it. Like that's a side that I want to talk to that, I don't know, I just think that's what's lacking. And that's what I think is pretty cool about what we've done so far.
Yeah. The question is, what happens when you essentially become the house and you aggregate as an advisor in alignment with the house, so to speak? And that's essentially kind of where we were getting to, which I don't think we knew up front. You know what I mean? The power of that And the more we kind of went down this path and the more we were having conversations with people within the industry, the more they were affirming, like, you're onto something, like you literally are onto an idea, and what you're thinking about is not that what we are doing hasn't been done, but in the way in which we're going about it is kind of unique and a little bit different in that regard. So that's what's been fun about it.
I mean, we started meeting people who thought we were
crazy.
They're like, not crazy. Like, it was like, you guys are crazy, but then they were also like, this shit's pretty cool. Like, dang. So what did maybe they think was crazy? Maybe that's a good way to put, like, what is TerraWealth as a top down? Because we think,
I think they thought it was crazy because we were standing up 3 entities at the same time. Like, just the amount of sheer lift. I think that was part of it. I don't think anybody thought the idea of owning your own RIA was crazy, and having brokerage and an insurance arm was crazy. I think it was that what we were doing, in not only in the time that we were doing it, with the pressures that came with that, but also how much we're biting off at one chunk because there was so much that needed to be fixed.
By 3 entities, what 3 entities are we talking about here?
Well, most advisors, when they make a shift to the RIA space, most advisors leave the traditional brokerage world. They're leaving that FINRA registration behind. And so one of the unique things was that we were still committed to maintaining what we would now call that legacy business. And so when you think about, from a regulatory perspective, you have, NAIC, which oversees all of your insurance business at the state level. You have FINRA, which oversees all of your brokerage business or broker dealer business. And then you have this RIA entity that's now overseen by the SEC. And you've got different similar rules, similar regulations, but you have a very different thought process on that migration. And so part of it was the commitment to being hybrid, meaning still having one foot attached to the brokerage business for the purposes of the legacy business, meaning in the RIA space today, it's getting better, but you couldn't offer variable annuities. You couldn't offer certain types of protection products in the same way. Some were available, but not all readily available.
In a lot of the places you guys talked to before going, kind of idea of going solo, we're telling you, leave one behind, right?
Yes.
Like, you don't get to do both.
Right.
So that you saw as I did too. We saw that as a broken part of the industry. Like, protection matters, in our opinion, right?
Yeah.
And you're excluding of that advisor pool, you're probably excluding what, 60, 70% of that advisor pool that you're just saying to them, hey, 30 years of building a BD book, good luck. There's a right way to do that. And being able to monetize someone's career body of work and then be able to slowly migrate it over to the RA side of the house, obviously is ideal, but we had to have a place for those people to go.
That's a great segue into, like, the model, like the actual model.
Yeah.
That when we were figuring stuff out, we were like, oh, wait a minute. We have all these legacy broker dealer dudes, which is where we started, and you did too, right? On the FINRA side. You're not just going to, like, at any point, legislation could, as in Canada and in England and so many others, just game's over for these guys.
By God, not in Texas.
Right? Probably not in Texas. They might secede. But that could just change, like, overnight. That was a real actual fear in Obama's second term that started to hit the industry, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of that out there. I don't even know how much money in billions of AUM is sitting in A shares and B shares, you know what I mean? That kind of stuff. So, but the people who own those independent broker dealers, that industry exploded over the 70s, 80s, 90s. But those people are, I mean, they're getting old.
Yes. So if you think about it statistically, pre-08, over 6,000 broker dealers in the United States. Okay. 08 wiped out a ton of them. Today, we're under 3,500. I think it's around 3,200 broker dealers today. So you've had this mass consolidation at the top of the largest, entities in the industry, but you still have this. It's a pretty good sized number. Let's just use 1,500 to 2,000 broker dealers who are owned by individuals who are aging just like the advisor population, who are responsible from a FINRA perspective to do certain things as it relates to a client account. And so you've now had this mass migration of advisors who have retired because they've just aged out, of their business, who this is why robo advisors became a thing. Go to a firm, open your own account, and do investing yourself. Don't use a financial professional because there just weren't enough there. And most of them were old guys
playing golf.
From a cohort perspective, they were 55 plus years of age, and they weren't reaching out to people in their 20s and 30s. They weren't going to serve middle America with trying to build wealth unless they were already retired and had lots of money to roll over.
So the very baby boomers who are retiring in mass their assets are being managed by baby boomers who are retiring in mass.
Yes.
Right. Which, so what's the deal? Like, I think this is like a fun thing to talk through. And this is going on in the industry. I just don't know if anybody's doing it at a way loud enough where, like, for instance, this podcast can end up on an independent broker dealer's YouTube channel and he's watching this, right? And they don't know how to get out without just basically handing over their book to some mammoth broker dealer who's basically going to bleed off their book of business and don't care about their clients. Because I think at the end of the day, most of these independent broker dealers like this who built these things, these are good people in every puddle jump across the country who represent really good people. They've got great clients that care about their clients. So the guy's like 70 and he needs to get out of the game. He knows it, but he also cares about his clients too much to just turn them over to some mammoth that just doesn't give a shit. It's just gonna, you know what I mean? Roll them into some earnings report. And so what's the answer for those kind of people?
Yeah, it's a real challenge. Number one, the answer is how do you create excitement, energy, not just passion, but being compassionate to help and serve others. So the same way a kid grows up today who says, I want to be a doctor. And they now have to go through, I forget the number of years in schooling, 8
to 10, right?
8+ years post, high school graduation to get in the medical field. How do you take and translate the same passion and compassion to help people financially that you do for their physical health, that you may for their spiritual health? If you're in if you're in that part of the business, right? If you're working in ministry or in church, if you think about the areas of life that people are most associated with wanting to be good at, it's physical well-being, spiritual well-being, financial well-being. There really is a challenge to create enough of it. A lot of schools are trying to develop programs that you can now major in financial services. You can get a master's in financial services, but that's literally been in the last 10 years. Right. So, you have to create enough awareness about it, but understand that when you compare and contrast, the time, effort, and energy to build a really successful business, this could be a really rewarding, super, not just personally, financially, from a family perspective, it can really check a lot of boxes from, what I think hopefully the next generation of people growing up in this country would want to pursue.
Jeremiah, how does that guy get out? Like, because he's kind of talking about how we really need young people to get into the industry, because it's a problem because we don't have enough of them. But even like right now, like that's part of what we wanted to, like you're dealing with a guy right now in the Midwest who's got a BD, he's been offered some money by one of the mammoths, and he's concerned about basically what's going to happen to his clients. Like, what is something we do at Terra uniquely, how we can help those guys? We'll talk RA as well, but I'm just thinking on the BD space for now because we're just talking about aging out.
I think the first thing is the care and consideration of listening, and then just being straightforward with them on where they're at in their practice or their life. A lot of times, like, especially the people I talk to that are like that, they've been sold something, but it's not like, hey, you're 75 years old. You should have been thinking about this 10 years ago. And that gets them to go like, oh, no one's ever said that to me before. You should have, like, succession takes a minute. It's not an overnight process. So unfortunately, once they come to that understanding and they realize the dire position that they're in, and sometimes we come in, lower or right at what the other offers are. But a lot of times it's like, it's a fair offer, but it's not usually what they're going to, if they truly care about their clients and who's servicing their clients and the goodwill that they've built in a community, they'll take someone that offers a fair offer than the highest offer that could give two craps about what's going to happen to their clients. So,
and also the opportunity to like hang around and help.
Right. And so that's the next thing is like, once you kind of jar them a little bit, the conversation then becomes, if we could build this out for you and you had some help, someone to come alongside you, and we can build the exit ramps for you, maybe that's 2 years, 3 years, 4 years down the road, or as long as you can do it. I mean, I'm not for people just retiring and sitting and gumming their food. Like, people need purpose, but when they know it's not all on them, it makes the job fun again. It makes their life pursuit worthwhile again, because they know that they have someone standing behind them if crap hits the fan. If they wake up the next day and, hey, you've got onset dementia, well, they're probably still going to remember their clients to a degree, but there's someone there. And it's not just throwing their career body of work away to be gobbled up in the ethos and have them get parted out like a company that gets parted out and sold off instead of keeping the company intact. And so I think it's just treating them with dignity. I think a lot of times, people lose aspect inside of that, and they don't treat people, goes back to what we were talking to earlier, they don't treat them with dignity. And it's, I think they can sense that.
Well, I mean, that's part of like one of our main creeds when we started, right? Was for advisors by advisors. Like, wholesaling, it's a form of advisory. Like, you sit across kitchen tables, you've closed billions of dollars of AUM. Like, we had our own books and built, clients. Like, you really deeply serve clients. But then for people like that to go own an RIA, broker dealer hybrid in the insurance space and everything else, we actually understand it, so that when you're talking to some guy who's he's aging out and he needs succession planning, we understand how much he cares about his clients because we actually care about our clients.
Right.
So it makes sense. So why don't you speak to like a broker dealer like that guy? We can help these people at Terra, right? We can give them a place. What can we do for them? Like, what are some of the options for somebody like that?
So, by the way, just like in the medical field, like advisors, the same way that doctors and dentists, and they're never taught like how to grow, scale, and exit a business, right?
Doctors have no clue.
Right. Same is true for a financial advisor. They're really great at serving clients and helping them financially transition through retirement and have an estate plan. But like growing, scaling, and exiting a business is a completely different knowledge base and skill set. And so, number one is, are you in a location that you can groom an advisor who can develop? Like, think about this. One of the biggest challenges from a skill set perspective is the soft skills that older generation, bedside manner is what we call it here in North Carolina. And I think in Texas we call it bedside manner.
Yeah, we called that in Indiana. Yeah.
But you got that bedside manner, those soft skills of client relationship building that's very different than, it just takes time. And so part of it is really not just the financial aspect of like exiting your business that you've built from the ground up, but it's also who can take over that business and have the soft skills. I've had the opportunity over my career to literally introduce clients to their third and fourth advisor in an office. So I met the client, advisor number one, helped put in their retirement plan, introduced them or part of advisor number two. Okay. That advisor leaves the office, went to another firm. I'm still there. I'm just a wholesaler. I've now introduced them to advisor number three. And now clients are getting my number and calling me and saying, where should I take my account? I trust you because you've been the one consummate relationship the whole time. Where do we go? What do we do? And so part of it is just understanding how to grow, scale, and exit a business. And so it's on us at Terra, for example. Part of our strategic game plan is to attract young advisors in a way to develop that skill set, to properly attach them, if you will, align them is a probably better word, to properly align them with the right, advisor to properly have that succession plan. And by the way, every client should know if you're an advisor and you don't have a succession plan at all, and you're a 10, 15, 20-year advisor, like, probably need to have that conversation. Like, what do your clients do if something happens to you?
That's part of what makes us really unique. I think it makes what we're doing pretty unique is you're talking about how we bring in a 70-year-old dude who's got his independent broker dealer. We can bring him in, not just putting him out to pasture, but how he can work with maybe the 40-year-old who also is from central Wisconsin, understands people where he's from. You know what I mean? Because that's also the thing, right? I mean, if you're you get some downtown Chicago advisor type guy, and I live in just Northwest Indiana, like an hour outside of Chicago, but I got a lot of farm clients and stuff. It's like an hour away. Those guys call sometimes on those people and they never get in the door because it's just culturally two different worlds. So it's also like, you called it philosophical alignment. It's fitting that cultural similarity in finding somebody to help take over your business. You have to find somebody that also you feel like you jive, and that they'll get along with your clients and they're going to treat them right and everything else. So I think part of what's unique about us is we're working on finding both of those people so that they can work together. And that's hard and it's slow and it's not something that happens overnight. But if you give somebody a place that they can at least mature in that, it can at least get there. You know what I mean? Versus not at all. So the broker dealers, I just want to talk about that because I think aggregation is such a fun conversation because you just said you would introduce people to like 4 different advisors. Well, why is that? Well, because they would grow up out of that channel, right? So it's like people, I like to think, and I've always said, I coined the term a while ago that people graduate to Terra Wealth. It's not probably where you start, but it's probably where you graduate to. It's like grad school or something, it's like med school, PhD. It's like, it's next level. You probably started captive. You probably started, in somebody's shop somewhere and you moved here due to the fact that the stuff we're talking about, that it just takes a different level of spiritual maturity, before you start to understand this stuff. Like you've had to be in the game a little while. It's not the first conversation, but What's aggregation? Why is it a big deal? Why is it a big deal that a broker dealer guy gets his book turned over to fee-based, not only for his clients? Let's just give that as a given.
Yeah.
It's better for the clients. Great. But if we all know that, there's more of a standard for you to do the right thing, et cetera. Beyond that, though, not just talking income for them, evaluation. Like if I'm a guy and I still got some runway and I'm in the independent broker dealer space and I come in, why would I want to flip my book? Is it worth more to me when I do get out? Is it easier for me to give it to that other person in a succession transaction? Like, I think that's a fun topic to get into.
It is. We could spend a lot of time just on this, but the numbers are the numbers. So, in the industry today, when you look at brokerage business, and when we say brokerage, we're talking about traditional business that earns what's called a 12B1 fee, right? That 25 basis point, whatever. That business, which we call legacy business, and we use the term street, meaning what's someone going to pay for something, no matter what it is, right? Is a 1 to 1.5 time value on the street. Okay. In any business, any professional service business, no matter what the business is,
value of like 1 times earnings for the year.
Yeah.
Okay.
So 1.5 times earnings.
Got it.
So any professional services business, you're going to typically get anywhere between a 3 to a 6 time earnings based on EBITDA, which is the most commonly used financial metric out there today. So that's for any professional services business. Well, the power of aggregation says, based on the ability to aggregate multiple advisor practices based on the services you offer, when you have more than one line of business and you extrapolate to 3 lines to 5 lines of business, what McKinsey has shown is clients will likely leave someone that's a 1-time, 2-time, 3-time business line. Once you get over 5+ lines of business, that client has a really hard time leaving that provider, no matter what the service is. So now when you get into a business to where you're offering insurance services, brokerage business, investment advisory business, you're talking about tax mitigation, estate planning, you're offering a number of services all in one environment. That aggregation now becomes a 15, 16, 20 time multiplier. So just like anything in business, it's the power of the numbers, right? We see it on social media. One person complaining about something doesn't do a whole lot, but all of a sudden you have a couple thousand, or a video goes viral, right? The same is true when you have an aggregation of advisors who are collectively rowing the same direction, who now have 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 lines of business. That valuation becomes a force multiplier to be reckoned with. And you now have a body of people being represented collectively who can participate in that. And the participation is based on the corporate structure. In America today, the only way people in America participate in that profitability is through stock ownership. You buy a share of a company's stock, that company does really well, it's worth more in the future, or they pay you a dividend, you participate in that. Well, for business owners, when you can aggregate under the right corporate structure, you participate in that same way without actually issuing stock to the public at large.
Which is why the broker-dealer guys not only talk to us, but the RIA guys do, right? Because they're like, wait, so my book's worth top 6 times, and by coming in and aggregating with Terra Wealth, I come on your platform, still get to do the fee stuff I'm doing now, but I get to add maybe insurance services, and I'm not in that side of the business anymore, but still got my life license. Maybe I can activate that now. But you're telling me my book, by becoming a part of an association of other advisors who are doing the same thing, our aggregate number of this overall firm creates a higher multiple.
Absolutely.
That's crazy. Like the first time the first time we heard that shit, we were like, hold up. wait a minute. This is kind of a big deal. This is not the same as just
It's
building a
crazy.
book.
So your dollar here, you get 25 cents on the dollar. Think of it like foreclosed real estate. I've got an old house over here that's worth something, but not a whole lot. I can buy that house for pennies on the dollar. That's legacy business. I can then go in and fix up that house. I can put a new roof on it. I can paint it, put windows, carpet. I can fix that home up. That 25 cents on the dollar is now worth $1. It's a 4-time multiplier. Now, because I, retrofitted that home in this market, that dollar is now worth $15. So the same dollar over here that was worth 25 cents now is upgraded to $1 worth $15. That's the power of aggregation monetarily, to put a number to it. It literally works in that progression.
Jeremiah, what have you seen, like when you're talking to people? You really run essentially mergers and acquisitions at Terra Wealth, because you are the point man of relationship. There's no question about it. When you're talking to people, like, what is their biggest pain? Maybe is a good point. And then what do they see in that what you're talking to them about with us? That's like really, how are they hurting? And what is it that we have kind of figured out in business model that seems to trip their trigger?
I think with every single one, they all ask the same question, because if they've been in the business long enough, they just want to know, is the juice worth the squeeze? Like, is this, maybe they've moved their book once before, or it just overwhelms them to think, like, how do I actually pull this off? And it almost cripples them. And then complacency of like, well, I know I've got X amount of dollars coming in a month, I'm just going to stay. And so there's no doubt that I tell this to the people I'm talking with, like, look, there's no perfect church, there's no perfect marriage, there's no perfect company, but what's the trajectory of where, those things are going? For instance, like in a marriage, like, are you working on the day-to-day things to make your marriage better? Or are you just said, oh, well, we've been married 30 years and it is what it is and it's not going to change. So I think it's helping them identify that for every single person we've talked to, it's the stumbling block of how do I get my arms around this? And is there someone to help me, show me how to do it? Number one question we get is their support. Can you help me map my book out? Can you help me walk me through start to finish what this looks like? Because the number is the number. I mean, like, there's, especially if they're a book of any size, I mean, there's PE firms that are bidding on the same business. It's not about that. It's about how they feel and the experience that they're having with the people that they're dealing with. At least the right ones are, at least if they keep coming back to the money, I mean, you can always solve and back into a number on the money, but that's always a good indicator to me that they're probably not the right people that we want to work with, because they're just focused on one thing. But across the board, it's getting them over that paralyzed, I can do this, and there's someone to help to show me how to do it. And then it's as big as they want their mind to be blown. I mean, because once they understand the world's their oyster and they can operate in autonomy, they can keep their same firm name level, or they can co-brand or brand at Terra, whatever it is that they want to do. Though it's almost like, I mean, I make tons of movie references, but it's almost like when the old Willy Wonka, when the kids walked into the chocolate factory for the first time, and they're like, you mean I can eat the flower petals and I can, go do this? And it's just like
the leaves on the tree, or
everything's
right.
edible.
Yeah.
What the crap? Like, what kind of witchcraft is this? Like, where I didn't even know this existed. So I think it's taking them through that part of getting them just unstuck, because if a person's listening to this, they're thinking, yeah, I feel this way. I've felt this way. It's just, they don't know where to go. and they need someone to walk them through, even if it's not Terra. I mean, I'd be happy to talk to him and say, look, let's find the place for you. But it's just helping them get over that mental hurdle of this is possible. And yes, we can show you how to do it, whether you're 70 years old and trying to offload your business, or whether you're 30 years old and, you're bumping up against that ceiling because they don't think you're smart enough to handle larger clients. I mean, it's crazy that the conversations are always totally different. I mean, it's always something different, but it's always that person feels either undervalued, underappreciated, or they're just immobilized by fear and don't know how to take the next step.
I think it's easy for this to become like a Terra. The Advisors Collective is a podcast that I wanted to start because I saw the industry itself. Like, our whole industry is hurting for collaboration. Like, nobody works together. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I always say that I don't really believe that competition exists. Like, I don't really believe in competition in business in the way that sports are. It doesn't work the same way, is what I'm saying. Elon Musk is very much of the same opinion I've come to learn recently. I finished his autobiography. He just doesn't have patents on Tesla stuff. But can you believe that? You'd think he'd patent everything. He doesn't even patent it. Ford could take it and go do it. But they don't. Because Da Vinci can show you how to paint, but it don't mean you can paint. Right? And I think there's certain people in the industry that could go do what we're doing 1,000%, but I think the part of the powerful thing of what we wanted to create was something that was collaborative. It's not just there's some people that own this financial company that I'm going to, but I actually have ownership in that company as well. It's truly like a company that's owned by the advisors. You started to get into it, but we didn't really talk about how the RIA, we're breaking it up, and the fact that the people whose books are held here actually own a part of the companies it's themselves.
Yeah.
And why that's a big deal, because when you take the house from 25 cents and you flip it to one, but then you put it into this housing aggregator group and it goes to 15, if the aggregator group sells off a portion of its earnings, right? What does that mean for advisors? Because there's two ways to get out of the business, right? There's getting out of your book, selling off your clients and getting out. But then there could just be, in this crazy world we live in, private equity, that side of things. I think that's just another aspect that nobody's ever really taken part in at firms. That's a fun thing to talk about.
A very simplistic way of thinking about it is, and it's the beauty of a multi-member LLC, but those unit holders are just like the shareholders of a company before they have an IPO. That's all it is. So it's literally a firm willing to give equity, in this case, to every single advisor and the value of their book of business, everyone rowing in the same direction for a future liquidity event, which traditionally in America would be an IPO, but it doesn't have to be an IPO. It could literally just be a firm, which private equity loves, investment services, saying we would love to participate in the revenue that you generate because it's such sticky revenue. There's value in that. So therefore, all the unit holders, participate in that liquidity event. That's the power of the aggregation. It's literally getting to a place to not be a shareholder, to be a unit holder.
Yeah, because you're multi-member LLC, right?
That's right.
Instead of shares, right? But that was one of those crazy things that, a guy was explaining to us one day, and I'll never forget. I'm sitting across the boardroom table. He's drawn on a whiteboard, and he's kind of explaining something, and we're like, we're looking at each other like, whoa,
Yeah.
wait a minute. A company that the advisors could all actually be a part of.
Yeah. So if you're at a firm that's a publicly traded entity, you would have to be given stock, which is what most large corporations do. for their employees. You work really hard, you do a really good job. We're going to give you stock. That's how you create equity towards retirement. Well, in a multi-member LLC, it's units. So you have units, you're creating the value of that unit. It'd be like, imagine for a moment, you were Apple at $1 a unit. You were a part of the creation of the iPhone. Those units became worth $100 a unit or $200 a unit. And then they said, hey, let's go public. And now every single unit that you're responsible for is worth $200. But you got it for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah, you didn't get it once it was public.
Yeah.
That's the difference. Like if I get stock in my company, it's like you got stock and the stock's been out for 25 years. It's not exactly shooting to the moon any day soon. It's the janitor of Microsoft he took stock options instead of Christmas bonuses, and when they went public,
Yeah.
He got financially independent.
Most of the wealth, in the United States have been created through that mechanism. The creation of companies that went on to become very profitable through expansion or aggregation. It's just the same model applied to financial services.
Yeah, I think
in 30, 40 plus years of career bodies of work.
I think the most fun part about that, Jeremiah, though, is like if a guy that occurs, Terra Wealth, let's say we build this, right? It's growing tremendously fast. We're not even 2 years old, right? And we're in, 26 states, I think, right now. When that type of thing occurs and there's this valuation on these units, let's say Jeremiah is some guy that came into our industry. Jeremiah, you still got your book. You still make all the money you make on your book. You still got all your clients. The direct impact on your individual business is zero. You just got a check from being a part of this greater thing that went down. And if you're old and you're ready to get out and you've been grooming some kid, you can also do that and now sell your book again.
Yeah.
In a way, it's like you sold it twice. It's like you get to double dip, which is pretty crazy.
That is the exciting part of 21st century wealth management as it exists today, and the epitome of what makes this business fun. So you get to love on clients, deeply serve them the way they want to be served, serve a lot of different lines of their needs beyond just investment management. We're talking multi-generational planning. You get to aggregate with advisors who philosophically align to serve clients the way you want to serve, and sharing that, profitability of equity, if you will, and pass that along. It really is, again, the creation of, the beauty and the silver lining of COVID, because had COVID not occurred, I don't know that the three of us would be sitting here drinking bourbon, smoking a cigar, wearing jeans, talking about financial services, not wearing our suit with a button-down white
Right.
shirt with a tie, and talking about how to actually grow, scale, and exit a financial professional business.
So there's all of that side, right? I mean, it's really exciting. Of course, what we've done is exciting to us, right? And hopefully to other. Well, actually, we know to others as well because we're like talking to people all the time. They want to get integrated with the firm. But I think as we tail on this conversation, that's where we are currently, right? We're talking to advisors, we're aggregating. There's people coming in organically. There's people that we're buying. There's people that are buying part of. There's, all that, those different situations are going on. But I think it's really important for people to know a little bit more. Episode 1, I talk a lot about kind of my background. But at the end of the day, if you go from being like a corporate position at Lincoln, you go from having an established book, captive, call it whatever you want that you were in the past. When you go to make that kind of transition, it's pretty crazy. So I think just from like who you are, like what's the story? Like who the hell, like really you start to think about it and you go, hold on. Like I was on Easy Street. You know what I mean? My income was going to double probably every year for some significant amount of years in a row, right? Until I was basically like done. And then you just decide, you know what, I had a kid. I quit my independent contractor status at the firm I was at 5 days after my daughter was born. Like literally flew to Dallas with you, saw Jeremiah, quit my job, right? 5 days after second child's born, my other one's 2 or 20 months old. It's just stupid. Like, you hear that stuff and you go, you're nuts. Jeremiah, so that, that's part of my story, but you did something really dumb. Now dumb meaning I'm looking at the way that the world looks at this stuff, right? But then I think somebody's got to do something dumb. You know what I mean? Because that's what has to occur. Henry Ford's got to do something crazy. Andrew Carnegie, somebody's got to do something crazy in order for something different to occur. Otherwise, we're all just going to be doing the same thing forever.
Yeah.
So like what was your thinking, Jeremiah? Like your story, you have how many kids, married? How long you been married?
Oh, you're getting this on tape. 2006 we were married. So 20 years in 2020.
2026. So okay.
20 years.
So
March,
18
this
years.
March will be
18.
18.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I as a financial advisor, we are drinking on a podcast, so I can't do math right
I
now.
just am like, that's like my kids. I don't know if they do it to you, but they'll say, you've seen that like little clip on Instagram. It's like the husband and the wife and the kids are standing there and this reporter comes up and starts talking to the dad, tell me this, and this. And the dad's like, I don't know. And the wife is standing right there, like hitting him. And that's the teacher's name, Mrs. Rice. Her favorite color is this, like all that. And I'm just like, dude, that's such a setup.
Yeah. I was at pharmacy the other day. She goes, what's your son's birthday? And I'm like, look into the sky for a moment.
I've got 4 kids. And every time they ask me that, I'm like, the person asked me that, I'm like, hey, don't judge me. I've got 4 kids, but I'll eventually get it.
So almost 18 years married, 4 kids, uproot really from what was really solid financial position, right? To do something totally different. What was kind of your thinking? Like my stuff is here's the framework. I wasn't going to be able to like look in the mirror knowing that by the time my son was like 10, 15, somewhere in his formidable teenage years, I wasn't going to be okay telling my son that he needed to do everything it takes in life to win, be somebody, compete. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, be somebody. I knew that from where I was never going to be able to have that conversation with him with any level of conviction, because I felt like I was at a place where I was on easy street. This was going to work, but I wasn't at a place where I was like fulfilling my God-given destiny in my eyes of what I thought my purpose, my ability is up here. I'm performing here.
Right.
I had to make a change because I didn't feel like I was going to be happy at the end of my life, only pushing as hard as I pushed. You know what I'm saying? Like that, it wasn't going to be fulfilling enough. Like, what was that kind of thing? That's part of what drove me to be like, let's do this. I'm not going to get to the end of my life and be happy with myself. I got to do something big for others, myself, so on. So like, what was going through your head that you're willing to uproot?
I mean, I was already on the way out. So, I mean, I already made the decision to what I didn't know. And I think the more that I started looking and talking and asking questions, and it really, at the end of the day, I was trading one master for another. And so that really didn't excite me from that leash standpoint. It may have been the leash may have been a little bit longer, but it still was a leash. And so for me, it was just, I mean, at some point you got to push all your chips in life, in something. The guys that I talk to, I got a really good friend. He's a banker friend of mine, and he had the opportunity to buy a bank when he was younger, and he didn't do it. And he kicks himself to this day. Like, but at the time it was like, I've got little kids, I've got this. He took the easy, but everybody has that moment in their life where they've got their shot, to take. And so for me, I was like, what I told my wife, I was like, what the crap? I mean, worst thing is we just start over. I mean, best case scenario, it hits and, it's life looks totally different. I mean, you got to do something, right? I mean, I've just I've never been risk adverse. I believe that calculated risk is healthy. There's always things that you can't plan for, but we made the decision together, and it was like, all right, let's do this. Because I was going to do something. I mean, why not do it with people that I like, and change aspects of an industry that needed to be changing, that no one, I was tired of the C-suites dictating my life. C-suites, I know they serve their purpose, but they don't know the first thing about what it takes to develop a client. Most of them never carried a bag. They don't know. There's just a disconnect. And therefore it becomes two polar opposite competing entities, and stagnation happens, and then people get frustrated and they go do something else. And I wanted to have something that people were in alignment through the whole process, and there was no stagnation. It was, hey, we can see that this is intertwined from the top to the bottom.
See a need, fill a need. I got tired of seeing buddies who I'd worked really hard developing, strong relationships with, leave firms that I was working with and going somewhere else, and began to just really look at the macro environment at large. And by the way, when we talk about COVID, there was a real strong undercurrent of frustration across the board. And I'm like, there's an opportunity here to do something different and unique. And so, I mean, I've lived my life literally believing, I'm where I'm at when I need to be there. And, most of us today in this business, we plug into people, we plug into mentors. And I have, like a lot of people, a tribe of mentors. Okay. And you know this, I'm a huge Kevin Elko fan, but it's the mantras. Every sports team, we are the week away from Super Bowl. It's every sports team.
Go Chiefs.
Has mantras. It's so what, now what? It's you either live in vision or you live in circumstance. You either own your destiny or you don't. And it's see a need, fill a need. And when you are driven by purpose, when you're driven by passion, when you're driven by conviction, meaning there's a greater calling purpose of who you are and what you're supposed to do. And when you understand the value of team, right? So, for example, we haven't articulated today, but one of our core mantras is...
Why don't you say the 3 core mantras?
Yeah.
We'll talk about those, because that might be part of like the good way to tail end the conversation a little bit. Because the mantra, it's funny because you brought those up. We didn't write these like in like some meeting all together. It was just one time you like said these mantras, and I was just like, yeah, that's it, bro.
Yeah.
Like it was like in my spirit, the same thinking, it was like I could have wrote them and told you. It felt that like synonymous when you told me those mantras. And I know it's the same for Jeremiah. Like it was just like, yeah, that's who we are.
It's just core. It's core principles of success or core principles of faith-based values. And they're very simple. And the good news is we have thousands of years of examples to follow, on what has worked and succeeded. And so, they're really simple. It's number one is if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And a lot of people just want to go fast and think of go fast as maybe like a one-hit wonder. But if you really want to go far, it's that band mentality, a really great band. And there's few that really go far together. But in order to go far, you gotta be tied. You gotta be tied off, just like you're climbing a mountain. You've got to be properly tied off. It's also in this industry, most really successful advisors don't truly share what makes them successful. The beauty of our society today is there is no shortage of like tips on how to be successful. But the mantra is, as iron sharpens iron, so too must we strengthen each other. And that just means we collectively share in our knowledge so that we make sure that our newest person on the team is as strong as our most successful person on the team. And last but not least, it's about integrity. And that is, show me with whom you walk and I'll tell you who you are. And it's really around who you network with. And that's just off of a really old principle I was taught in college. When I say in college, I mean selling books door to door in college, which is you'll be the same person today 5 years from now, except for the books you read and the people you associate with. And that ability to associate and build your network is probably one of the most probably most underestimated power in society today is the power of networking and aggregating with the right people. And that's why we're so intentional about philosophical alignment. And so when you talk about your why, it evolves over time, but out of a heart of deeply serving, it's a servant leader's heart to really serve others is the purpose. But to Jeremiah's point, we both shared in, when we came through COVID, large corporations made changes like turning a battleship. It became really tough. Small, independently owned businesses can change on the dime. And the question today for every single institution or business is, are you growing at the speed of change? And if you're not growing at the speed of change, you're probably falling behind in some way, shape, or another. And when you think about growing at the speed of change, here's what that means. Every time you grow and or double, you break half the things that you have in place. And if you're not nimble enough to fix what you break along the way, then you're going to become antiquated really quickly. And so that's all part of intentional design. It's what's the phrase I would use? Maybe disruption by design is maybe a phrase I would use as we're thinking about this whole industry and what we're doing and how we're doing it. But it's out of a heart of servant leadership to others, because there's nothing more satisfying if you play on a team and if the Chiefs happen to win the Super Bowl next week.
Come on, somebody.
There's nothing more satisfying than seeing your teammates. Mahomes and Kelsey got them. They got the rings. But you know what they're going to love? That rookie on the team who's never had a chance to have a ring now gets to put that ring on. And there's nothing more, rewarding than seeing a teammate, an advisor who spent 30, 40 years in a business, growing and scaling a practice, having that their own retirement and having a succession plan and passing that from one generation to the next. And so,
yeah, there's a lot of hope in.
I might mic drop right now.
It's so good. Bam. There's a lot of hope when you talk to somebody who's on that back end of life and you're like, dude, I got to wait for you not to just get like kicked out of the game. You still get to play, but we got second and third strings to back you up now. And there's a way to help you get out and to be able to also talk to the young advisors. And we got young advisors who got $8 million in AUM and they're young and they're getting going, and the iron sharpens the iron, and they're learning from the older guys, and they're, and it's fun because the old guys are learning from the young guys crap that they're like, how do you make a Facebook post? And like, it's cool because if you live by those mantras, and that's kind of your spirit, your way that you look at the world, like you fit in our environment. If you're a baby boomer, you're a millennial or a Gen Z or something, you're right. And so anyways, that's fun. So Jeremiah, what on the mantras, anything in there that Scott was saying like really stick out? By the way, Jeremiah is not a Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift, or Kansas City Mahomes bandwagoner. This guy grew up in Kansas, lives in Texas now, but he's been a KC fan, when it was not cool at all to be
Steve
a KC
DeBerg.
fan.
Steve DeBerg.
So
Anybody
he's the
remembers
real
him?
deal. So this ain't no.
He's not a bandwagon.
He's not a
fan.
bandwagon. This guy was. He's
So
the
cool.
real deal.
Cool story is so the Royals in 1985. I was with my grandfather, my dad, and we were watching Brett Saberhagen, George Brett win the World Series.
How old are you, dude?
45. So 1985.
I was born in '85.
So fast forward 30 years, and it's 2015, and it's me, Thatcher, and my dad watching the Royals win the World Series. It was kind of cool. But
Yeah, that's awesome.
yeah, anyway, you made me think of that.
So speak to that a little bit.
The mantras.
Yeah.
I think the thing that's the most applicable in my life was the go fast, go alone. And that's probably is just a byproduct of the broker dealer or the company that we came out of. It was the business model wasn't conducive to my personality. And so I would just go fast and go alone. And so what I learned is that, my business really wasn't repeatable from a standpoint of, I almost viewed it kind of like if we're on a track and we start off together, I wouldn't wait for you. I would just catch you on the next lap and be like, as long as you stayed on the track though, like I'd catch you the next lap. Come on, Josh, let's go. And I think now it's more of like, really being intentional and passing, not that, I've done anything super special, in the industry, but I am more intentional on slowing down and making sure that the easy things that can be worked on and translated to an advisor are translated instead of just being like, oh, they'll figure it out. Like I have a more vested interest to make sure that happens. I do it with the client. Like the client, like we're going together and we're going slow, your speed. But for an advisor, it was hard for me to have the patience to be like, you've been here how long and you don't know this? Like, and so I think that's the one that speaks most to me out of all of them.
Yeah, I would say that's for you as well. Like literally, I was like, yeah, go fast, go alone. Like, because that's who you were, but now you're such like and not that you weren't a team player. It was just where you were. It didn't make sense for you to think in the terms. But well, this has been awesome. I'm really excited about the oncoming episodes because there will be an episode where like I individually hang with these guys to really hear their story because like, I mean, as individuals, it's always easy to say you're humble, but like these are really humble guys. And like, it's easy to just say like didn't do much or whatever. But in reality, like everybody's done some pretty special things in the time that you spent in the industry. But to hear your individual stories is going to be really cool. So we'll sprinkle that in the future between other episodes. But it's just been a lot of fun. Hopefully a lot of fun for others. It's been fun to reminisce a little bit. Yeah. Kind of just talk through like how we met. I mean, I'll never forget walking in the airport, baggage claim, South Side, Atlanta. You got the North and the South, right? Walk to the other side. And I don't know you from Adam, and I'm with somebody else like, hey, Scott, nice to meet you. Josh, and Jeremiah, similar. I called you the first time ever because I got your number from Scott. Yeah. And so,
tidbit. So tell them about our brothers.
So my name's Josh.
It's Joshua.
Yeah. Joshua. I'm the oldest, but, I had a younger brother, Jeremiah. So then Jeremiah, so Joshua and Jeremiah in my family. And then he's got a younger brother named Joshua.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of trippy.
And he's the older Jeremiah. So when we met, so it's funny because we've literally become like brothers. I lost my brother Jeremiah. I now have an older brother Jeremiah instead of a younger. It's been a little flip. But it's been a blast. When you want to go fast, go alone. When you want to go far, go together. But if you want to go together and you want to build a band like the Eagles or something. It's like a dynasty. It's 40, 50 years. You know, it's like till people die of old age, not drugs. You know, like a true dynasty, it's you got to go with the right people. You got to be aligned. You got to be spiritually aligned. You got to be where it makes sense. And I think that goes for advisors when they're looking for a new home. They have to also find the place that's like, you got to fit in. Like you got to really, it's got to be the right people. And we're definitely not the right people for everybody, you know, kind of thing. But we're the right people for the ones who think like we think. So anyways, this has been awesome. A lot of fun. Thank you guys. Thanks for coming on. Scott Leonard,
Oh, good.
Appreciate it.
CEO of TerraWealth. Jeremiah Diamond, founder and head of merger
Swiss
and
Army
acquisition.
knife.
Swiss Army knife. It's been a lot of fun. Appreciate you guys. See ya.
Hey, thanks for listening to this episode. If you're enjoying the content and the show, you can help us by leaving a review on Spotify or iTunes. If you're on YouTube, like, subscribe, and share. It really helps us with the algorithms to reach more great advisors who need to hear this great message. The conversations on this podcast are intended to provide financial advisors with ideas, strategies, concepts, and tools that could be incorporated into their advisory practice. Advisors are ultimately responsible for ensuring implementation and compliance of anything discussed in accordance with all your regulatory and compliance responsibilities and obligations. These discussions are meant purely for educational purposes, and none of the information heard should be taken as financial advice or planning. The conversations and opinions that are expressed in the show are that of each host and do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the other host and their affiliated companies. This podcast is not intended to give tax, legal, or investment advice. Always consult with a qualified professional. For my personal practice, securities are offered through Cape Securities Incorporated, member FINRA, SIPC. Investment advisory accounts are offered through TerraWealth Management.